I did want to take this moment while we have two other editors of esteemed publications with us to talk about doing media in and around Zionist bullshit, because I guess we've all been doing that for the last couple of years. And I want to ask you both, to the degrees that you're comfortable and or allowed to talk about these things, So just really quickly, what it was like for me was, believe it or not, the people that own the shot, the chaser, not Zionists. That shouldn't surprise anybody. They are capitalists. They do have a business to run. That was the restrictions I faced, but it wasn't Zionist nonsense. So October 7 happens. I, with the privilege of a decent university education, understood the geopolitics. I guess I had to wrestle with myself for about 5 minutes to undo some of the shock therapy that I had absorbed, the lessons not to talk about this subject. I grew up I live in a Zionist area. I walk my kid to school past posters for IDF fundraisers and book tours and this kind of shit. I am immersed in it. I used to play, in my 20s, I played soccer with 10 Israeli dudes that have unfollowed me on Facebook in the time since. I've been immersed in this, and I had to get past that shock therapy of knowing that if I talk about this, it's going to be painful, it's going to be uncomfortable, I will get threats to my sanity, my physical health, all of that stuff. And all of this stuff did happen. But ultimately, I had no owner of a media saying you can't say that. I had a fairly free remit. It's a privilege. And knowing that, also recognizing the privilege of a middle-aged white man that can say things that other people can't without getting piled on by the Murdoch press the way Yasmin would have, did. I sort of had to run with that. Now, you, Esther and Antoun, were in slightly different positions. We'll go to you first, Antoun. You were at The Guardian when this blew up. I'd love to know what happened to you personally in the 2 years since.
It was fun. That's what I'll say. Well, look, it this all actually, there was a bit of internal rumblings in 2021, the last kind of mini Gaza war, where I think about 2,000 Palestinians were killed, and there were objections within the newsroom that I kind of were part of, in terms of the way we were covering it, the words we were using. It was around the time, I think, when Human Rights Watch and Amnesty had released their reports into Israel being an apartheid state. So we were questioning why we weren't referring to Israel as an apartheid state. And we ended up having a call with the foreign editor in the UK, the man who runs the show in terms of coverage for Gaza. And I put the question to him. I said, why aren't we using it? And his response was because in South Africa, the South African regime referred to themselves as apartheid. It was a specific Afrikaans word, which we didn't get into a debate, but it kind of like they ignored the fact that it was an Afrikaans word. It was a word that the South African regime used to describe their own system before it was taken down, but afterwards it caught on and evolved into having some kind of legal connotations attached to it, which is now used in international jurisdictions, as we saw with International Court of Justice last year in their ruling. So that laid the groundwork, and I always knew, I said, if this blows up again, and it will, this newsroom is going to fall apart. And lo and behold, it did. So as soon as the genocide started in October 2023, I held like mid to senior an editor position in The Guardian, and they refused to grow me. They refused to give me paths to grow because I was seen as a bit of a brown agitator on the inside. I was steering the cultural and linguistic diversity committee. I was coming up with all these employee groups of minorities and connecting with my peers in the UK and the US. And always pushing for things and always coming up with, you've got to do better on diversity, meaningful changes. Don't just come up with, a festival. So they always knew that, and they knew my background. My expertise is the Middle East. I worked and lived there for several years as a journalist. I lived in the US under the Trump administration the first term, and I worked for a think tank called the Middle East Institute, where I was and while I was at The Guardian, I was a non-resident fellow at a think tank on the Middle East. I was literally a Middle East expert in the newsroom.
We don't want to listen to you about any of that. Then would
no,
we?
they didn't want to hear it. So as soon as it started, they took me off one of my job roles, which was presenting videos, and they rejected all of my pitches for analyses. And then I just accused them. It got to the point where I was like doing part-time work. I was doing about 3 hours of work a day. I was getting paid full-time, which isn't that great if you know the Guardian salaries. And it just like I said to the editor at Guardian Australia, I said, I think you're doing this because I'm an Arab. I think you've sidelined me because I'm an Arab. And their response was, this is a really serious accusation. And I said, well, that is my accusation. So unless you can prove otherwise. So and then the open letter came about at the end of 2023, which I wrote, with some other fabulous journalists from other newsrooms. And that made a lot of headway in Australia. About 300 plus Australian journalists from across newsrooms, ABC, SMH, Crikey, and so forth, signed that open letter. That was a real great effort, I think. Mm-hmm. And then I think because they knew Guardian people were involved in leading and steering that open letter, which was a copy and paste of an open letter that, if you recall, there was an early one done in the US, which was also drafted by a Guardian US journalist. So the Guardian reporter tier of Guardian staff are pretty their morals are in check, and they want to do meaningful journalism. A lot of them do. And so, and I think because of, there were two new open letters, one in the US, one in Australia, pretty much done by Guardian journalists. The Guardian HQ cracked down, and they sent an email out to every Guardian staff member across the world saying, essentially, do not sign open letters unless you get approval from your senior manager. So, we went into a bit of a revolt as a result of that. All the unions kind of got together of the three branches in the US, UK, and Australia, and we pretty much dared our employers, we dare you, and we'll see you in court if you try to impose that on us. And it just froze in place after that, and it's been frozen still. So I think, in terms of the Australian division, I kind of was the person that was really pushing for better coverage of Gaza and really calling out the blatant racism at top level that resulted in me being treated the way I was treated despite my professional background. I was told I was too passionate. I was told that in not so many words, I was too close to the story because they didn't say because of my ethnicity. They just chopped at it. You're just too close to the story. So essentially the Guardian, the view of the Guardian editors who are 99% white, and if they're not white, unfortunately the POC is just playing white because that's the only way you can get up there. They came to see, and it was clear to everyone, and especially to POCs, that they came to see our backgrounds as liabilities, not as assets that could actually enhance coverage. And I was in Beirut last year, and I emailed the editor-in-chief in the UK, who I know personally, and I said, look, you've got no one here. I am here. There is a war happening in the south. I've got plenty of contacts in the region because I've worked here before. I'm from the region. I don't even need a visa. I'm a Lebanese citizen as well as an Australian citizen. I can, just if you want some work done, I'll do it. They didn't at all. But they sent a white British dude about 6 months later from London to do the work.
God, that's incredible.
So that's The Guardian. So The Guardian really has this kind of arrogant neo-colonial attitude, pretty much telling people of colour, even if beyond people of colour, telling Indigenous people of the areas in which the issues are unfolding, no. We'll take care of it. We'll do the job for you. You're not quite up to scratch. You don't quite have the chops to cover your own story. We'll cover it for you. And that's just kind of how it all kind of crumbled, sadly. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of POCs who have left Guardian Australia in the last 2 years. There's a lot of talent that's left Guardian Australia. Incredible. And I think Palestine played a big role in that because it exposed the hypocrisy of the editorial class. It exposed their racism, but it also exposed that they just all this D&I stuff, all the cold groups, and we want to meet targets and have these wonderful town halls where we talk about how wonderful we're doing in terms of hiring people of color, was just hollow, empty, nothing. Because when it came to the crunch, when it comes to really covering the stories that required perspectives that weren't of their own, they shut the doors.
And then they churned out a whole bunch of two-state solution, Israel's a right to defend itself shit, while they've told you that your expertise, knowledge, investment in the story is the thing that's going to stop you doing good coverage. That seems just absurd.
Well, the most insulting thing for me, I think, was, given my background and my expertise, was having editors who knew nothing about my own homeland wanting to edit and tell me how it should be covered. They have no background. They have no idea about Gaza, about Palestine, about Lebanon. And they wouldn't even have the humility to even engage a discussion about it. Being like, hey, you know what, you were a journalist over there. Can you give us a bit more information? None of that. No respect whatsoever. And that's exactly how they look down on people of colour amongst the kind of like editor tier of Guardian Australia.
I mean, this is why colonialism doesn't just happen on a battlefield. It happens in newsrooms as well. Esther. Sorry.
I just want to make one more point. The racism at places like The Guardian and the ABC, as we've seen, are far more insidious and far more dangerous than the types of racism that is so overt with, the Murdoch media. They're not hiding. They know what, we know what they are, and they know what they are, and they say it out loud. It's the Guardians and the ABCs of the world that pretend to have this kind of righteous ground in the media landscape where they're the best of the best, the most intellectual of all, and they couldn't possibly be racist, or they couldn't possibly be misogynistic, or they couldn't possibly have bigoted views towards anyone. But they have them, and it's insidious, and it seeps into their HR, social media kind of policies, and who can cover what, and where they put their POC staff. It's far more insidious, and it needs to be called out more regularly.
It's a type of racism that you can normalize far easier without noticing than the more overtly frothy stuff. Esther, would you like to jump in on this?
Oh gosh! First of all, I'm culturally obliged to pick up on this point that the South Africans think they invented the word genocide. Obviously, genoktonia is a Greek word and has been around for a very long time and describes atrocities that humans commit. No one has a monopoly on that word until all genocide is gone. I just think it's, more power to you, Antoun, for everything that you have done, everything that you will do. This notion that, white institutions like the ABC or the Guardian, this notion that they can claim a cultural neutrality or a view from nowhere, that is political bullshit, and in itself is a racially embedded notion. There is no such thing. That simply describes colonialism. As editor of Meanjin, as the first editor of Meanjin for whom English is not my first language, I am very proud of everything that I published, and I stand by every one of my editorials that touched on genocide, every one of the essays that I commissioned or published, the poetry that Annie Janine Lane published, the great reviews that Sher Tan selected and published, the What I'm Reading and other pieces that Eli McLean selected. We made a very strong editorial choice around, first of all, an indigenizing agenda, that we always begin our reading experience by listening to and learning from elders, and that we present perspectives that give a very strong, clear sense of where Australia is at culturally, and bring us to bear this particular cultural moment in the world.
Can I just jump in, Esther? So our viewers would know that Meanjin's closure was abruptly announced a short time ago after a pedigree of, 69 years? 85 years.
Yeah. The summer edition is the 85th anniversary edition.
So there have been rumours abounding, and were raised yesterday at the Senate inquiry, that one of the reasons that Melbourne University Press decided to shut it down was directly linked to an essay that was published by the CEO of the Jewish Council of Australia, Max Kaiser, beg your pardon, and that it is yet another one of these examples of influence being brought to bear to silence protest against the genocide in Palestine. Is there any comment you'd like to make on that?
I'm not able to comment on that.
I'll make a quick comment if you're not able to.
Well, let's hear from Esther first, what she can and can't say we appreciate.
I'm enormously proud of the work that I've published, but I'm also enormously proud of the career that I have led and will continue to lead,
of course, yeah.
Being an outspoken supporter of artists' rights and their voices. I'm in the I'm in a position now where the work that I and my predecessors, but the work that I and my collaborators have published over the last 3 years can very beautifully speak for itself, because that work is eternal.
Well said.
Yeah. Dave, anything further you'd like to add on this?
I mean, I don't think I need to. I think people can read around the lines, and I think Esther has spoken very elegantly for herself. I suppose the entire university sector toying with this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, it should give you some sorts of clues about what types of people are running these institutions. I went to the University of Melbourne. I did a history degree. If I wanted to write a very factual, dry history essay about the origins, the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, I'd be flirting with accusations of anti-Semitism.
I mean, you only need to look at also at, who kind of sits in positions of power at these universities, right? Melbourne University is a good example of that. Who are in these influential positions to kind of, influence kind of decisions like we saw with Meanjin. But I will say one of the reasons why, I'm doing Deepcut and I came into being and a lot of the coverage that we've been doing is precisely on the stuff that Meanjin experienced, which is that, which is not being covered by mainstream media, which is a real danger for Australia in terms of the pro-Israel lobbies, ardent, unrelenting efforts to just quash free speech in this country because they've lost the narrative. And if you look at the pro-Israel lobbies activities across the Western world, it's replicating everywhere. That's why they're trying to buy TikTok in the US. That's why they're shutting down, kind of free speech on campuses in universities, which is like the center of academic freedom and meant to be the center of academic freedom and kind of like pioneering, all sorts of ideas. They want to shut that down. The pro-Israel lobby, if you're supporting a genocide, I'm going to kind of say you're kind of insane already. But the fact that these people have so much wealth and so much power that they're able to shut down or make a really good attempt at shutting down free speech in this country should ring alarm bells for everyone in Australia who considers democracy a thing they want to hold on to. That's the story behind what's happening with Meanjin.
Well said, mate.
Because the thing about Meanjin, and we will wrap up this episode, but because Crikey did a good episode this week, friend of the shot, Cam Wilson wrote it, I believe, that, there were offers to buy it. If the narrative that Melbourne Uni Press, supported by Melbourne Uni, were running was that it's too expensive all of a sudden to keep investing $200,000 a year in Meanjin. So it didn't make any economic sense. Never made economic sense. That's not what culture is about. But therefore, it would be shut down. And that was despite the fact that there were consortia who immediately swung into action and said, well, we will buy it from you. We will buy that masthead. But no, they wouldn't entertain any bids at all, which suggests that there was something other than economics behind the decision. And Esther's letting her eyebrows do the talking.
Picking up what your eyebrows are saying loud and clear, Esther.